Hey everyone, I'm Jo Holden. I'm an active conduit for source intelligence and I'm here to help the collective. So today's session looks like I've already made a start on it without people. We'll be filling these in towards the end. So I want to talk about, in terms of reality operating as a very, very, very sophisticated simulation, what's the purpose of that? Because there's a lot to be said about function, but why? If, and I wholeheartedly know and believe there is a supreme being, a supreme intelligence, a supreme source of all the powers and energizers and creates and constructs many different worlds and realms across many planes of existence that are, when we get into it, the component parts of the soul transmission that express across multiple densities within many different dimensions. All of this richness, all of this variety, all of this possibility and potential that exists, what's the point of it all? And so in the easiest summary I know how to give based on what I understand is it's to experience and express different aspects of self in different conditions and circumstances over different periods of time, having access to different tools and resources. And it's that wonderment, it's that curiosity of where will this lead, what will happen. It's to be creative, to be adventurous, to be explorative, to be dynamic, and to have the divine desire to see any and all that can be created. How far can it go? And we're going to talk about that in terms of the generative system. Now obviously what I'm describing right now is the organic system, in alignment with God's original design, and much of what we see in our world at this time showing up as representations of source, God, creator, experiencing, expressing self. What we're seeing, of course, is a lot of corruption, a lot of corrosion, a lot of distortion, a lot of inversion. And how and why could that have happened? What would have allowed that? Why within the design would there be mechanisms through which that corruption and corrosion can happen? So before we talk about how and why that could happen functionally, I just want to give an overview of what I believe reality is supposed to be, can be, should be, if it was purely an expression of God source creators organic will, the I am. So that you'll see here. So for me, the original design, if we were to look out into the physical material reality around us, all of which is created through effects that come from the tools and the power source that God source creator has provided, I will fill in, I'm going to use these as acronyms, and we'll fill in a more detailed fashion what to me I perceive them to be, which has come through guidance, by the way. But just for now, as a summary, organic to me is anything that gives life, is living, has life, and is derived from natural systems and processes as an original product, or as an original effect, an original output. So by natural systems and processes, we're talking about anything that operates that is not made or caused by, the dictionary definition says humankind, obviously, because there's not a whole lot of acknowledgement of any other life form. I've put et al. Because I believe there are other and different life forms that are intelligent beings that have agency. And so, yeah, covering the spectrum, any and all. So, that being the case, if the conception or the inception, the idea, the original plan was to create a system through which many different worlds and realms and different life forms could exist, and God Source Creator could express self and experience outcomes from that, outputs from that, and then have this generative system that then feeds back all of the sensations that we experience, everything we think, everything we feel, our drives, our desires, our aspirations, our ambitions, our hopes, our dreams. Not sure if I already said dreams, but you get the gist. And and of course the physical sensations as well, everything we smell and taste and touch, and all of that richness, all of that variety is in a constant state of flow. So we have input from non-physical through to physical, and then feedback from physical through to non-physical in terms of how that feels, what we think about it, what more we want. Do we want to amplify that? Do we not want to experience that again? What would make it better? What could make it more novel? So there's this constant data coming in. We are, of course, within this simulation, so we are constructed, configured of that data too. So when we look at the operating principles and organising principles and the various components and how they interact, I'll make that clearer in terms of functionally. But for now, we are constantly having experience, and as a result of that experience, constantly feeding back. But essentially, to understand it as a projection, to understand it as a interactive, intercommunicative, integrated system, is to understand that as a projection of God Source Creator, we are essentially showing up as God Source Creator in many different forms, having many different experiences in order to feed back to higher, truer self, in order to continue to grow and evolve, naturally enhancing what resources are available, because every time we have a reaction to something, every time we have a response to something, whether it's what we do want or what we don't want, there is a request there, whether that be more of or something different that's happening. So that's therefore having an impact on what is available, because it constantly flows, it constantly feeds back. So as we're feeding back as, for lack of a better word, as avatars, as characters in this construct, having this experience, as we're doing that, it's generating more and more source coding that is then inputting, that's a new word, informing or instructing or inspiring the creation of more and more stuff. So that's happening through the integrations, which is leading to vital. That was the word I kept hearing, but I've put in brackets there, voluminous, because to me, there's so much of it that it's not just, quality is of course important, but it's not just about quality, there's quantity of what is available. And when we look at the densities, we'll look at frequency ranges of what those potentials are, what is active and what is available, because it increases with each density. How much light, which we're going to talk about in a sec, how much light is available directly impacts, directly informs what the range of potentials for what can be experienced, what they are. So, we'll come to that. So it's a generative system. It's constantly, input, and then input to output becoming then input, and so on and so forth. So from my perspective, who and what God source creator is, and you see this in the scriptures, and you see this come through in any testimony where anyone's had any type of profound experience where they felt very connected to God source creator, whether that's out of body, near death, deliverance. I know a lot of people talk in more religious terms, having sort of experiences where they may have been experiencing more of the dark side of reality, and something, somehow, some intervention has happened and has brought them into a clearer state of who and what God source creator is. And what all of these various testimonies seem to agree upon is the love, which, if you understand, and I say this in the sessions that I recorded last year, the ones that I linked in the sessions that I recorded over the last couple of days and uploaded, what we know as love is the sensation that we experience as we absorb more light. So we'll talk about that, but what people seem to agree on is that sensation of love and light, and the feeling of being supported, the feeling of being guided, of being protected. There's a goodness to it, and it does say in various scriptures, I believe, God is good. So when I'm talking about the overarching operating system of the entire reality, not a derivative system that has been created by some other being, some other entity, but the system that we experience in terms of everything that we interact with in a natural, organic sense, I think of that as the goodness system. And to me, what that means is God's original organic design, navigation, so you get guidance, empowerment, so it's giving power to you, support system. So through the soul transmission, as we get further into the sessions, we'll clarify some of this, but through the soul transmission, of which that soul is created as a representative, a fractal reflection of God's source creator itself, as that soul transmission transmits, carries forth the I am presence. This is who and what I am, this is who and what I want to experience being, in the creation of whatever the incarnation of that soul at that time, whatever character that is. It's the projection of the organic will, being the I am, that's empowering reality and any and every aspect of source, God creator, in this reality. Is that vessel, it is that vehicle, it is the conduit through which God source creator expresses, then experiences, that feeds back, that generates more power, more of that I am, and more coding, which is the language, which when we understand light, we understand it's bits and bytes of data that become, that come together to create packets of data, that come together to create molecules of data, cells of data, and of course within that, each bit and byte of data is the information, the instruction, the inspiration for different aspects of function. So as the I am projection, the power source, comes together with the coding, the bits and bytes of data, the language that has been designed specifically to create all that is reflective of God's source creator. Then those combined is what we know on the effect side of things, as in within the reality, within the simulation. What we've just described is the causal side. We're on the effect side. We're experiencing the effects of that. So we know that is light. And I'll fill that in a second. So projection of the organic will empowering reality. So God had a plan. And as we know, you can have an idea for something, but then you have to take action if you want to make it real, if you want to bring it into being. There has to be an active component to that. So the projection of the organic will is the I am. The coding is the instructive element of it. So in the beginning was the word. That would be the coding, and from that, God said, "Let there be light." So He combined His will. And for anyone who is very sort of invested in the religious scriptures and doctrines, I don't utilise this to be disrespectful. I think the scriptures are beautiful. I also don't come from a religious background, so this is not about me wanting to just cherry pick what suits. It's just this has played in my mind so many times when I've been looking at these materials. The guidance I receive, they repeat to me on a regular basis, that in the beginning was the word, was the code, and it was the language initially created through which any and all effects that we experience in this physical material reality could be created. And because it's being utilised within a system that is generative, it's constantly updating, and if the closer we are to God's source creator, the truer it is, the more effective in terms of goodness it is. The further away we get, then the more distortion there will be, even within the organic system. If we're operating within a world that is fairly distant from God's source creator, then of course there can be distortions that come in terms of comprehension and interpretation. And therefore, me speaking on this, I'm not aiming to claim to be a representative for any particular religious organisation or institution. I'm not trying to indoctrinate people into that particular approach to connecting with God's source creator, but I do have a lot of respect for it. So I just want to make that very clear. So the coding being the bits and bytes of data that they configure in different formats, in different ways to create the reality and all the variety of reality that we experience. I will link some on the playlist that will be attached to this. I will link some resources that talk more, some technically and some more informally about that, but just for anyone that's like, I need this explained in more detail, then there will be resources available. So if the I am is the power source, it's a projection of the organic will empowering reality, then the coding transfers what originally was a design, an idea, a plan, into the various resources, meaning representations of source, of God, of creator. Resources, re always means again, right? You know, to repeat, to redo. So it's another, everything that we look at around us that is organic and natural is a representation, a representation of God, source, creator. So it's a transference of resources ubiquitously, everywhere, anywhere we look, anywhere within the planet itself, of course, is a representation of source, anything and everything, in terms of astrologically, cosmologically, on every level, we are seeing transference of source, representations of source, that's transmitting heterogeneously, so in all different forms, which is what I've just said. So those combined give us light. So that would give us the locomotion, as in loco being place, motion as in movement, that is impelling God's holographic transmissions. So I'm going to talk about the holographic principles in terms of function, and the significance of them, the importance of them. Realising I didn't need that apostrophe there, but okay. So the locomotion, everything's in a constant state of flow, everything's having the I am, organically speaking, if we're talking about the reality that God originally designed. Everything is being driven in terms of the power source by God's agreement, God's assignment, God's allocation, you could say. All of these words would associate. So that's impelling, driving it forward. The holographic transmissions of the coding. So I was listening to a podcast interview that Stephen Wolfram was on. I'm trying to remember which podcast it was. I think it may have been, I want to say Dr. Brian Keating, but I'd have to double check. When I find it, I'll link it. So he was talking about how physicists now, when he was proposing a new sort of theory of time, I believe, if I remember correctly, and the big takeaway was that, for me, I was sort of doing jobs and listening to it in the background, so the main takeaway that I remember from it was that as he was talking about his theory of time and what it means in terms of how we perceive it, for a very long time, guidance I've been receiving, whenever the concept of time has come into the sort of theme of or topic of what I've been looking at, I've always heard it's data processing. What time ultimately is information processing. So what we're attending to right now is our present, data that we've attended to in the past, that we've processed in the past, we know as the past, and any data that will go on to process will, right now that's our future, but will become our present when we're processing it. And so we can jump around from past to present to future just in our thoughts any minute of any day, sort of thing. We can measure time, but what it actually is and does is really us processing. And when we talk about the densities and the various dimensions, the reason why there can be such difference in functionality is the amount of data that is not only available, as in how much light is available, it's also, because I'm not sure if I already said this now, but the higher the density, the more light it is. The lower the density, the less light there is. So the more light you've got, obviously the more possibilities and potentials of what can be created exist, but also to exist within that density as a character, an avatar, as a vessel, a vehicle through which God's source creator can explore and adventure and experience things. There has to be the capability, the capacity to process more data, to be able to process more and more information. So this can be one of the reasons why, for those of us who receive guidance and downloads, and of course anybody and everybody can, and many people do without even identifying it as being that, but that's a digression. One of the struggles I've had over the years is sometimes so much can be revealed in such a, it can be a simple sort of image or idea, or I can get referred back to certain things that I've interacted with, that I've come across in research, and it can take a lot longer to unpack everything that represents, in terms of the significance of it, the importance of it, how it connects to other aspects of the content that I've been constructing and creating. So that sort of difference in terms of what we have access to and what we have the capability to process from it, we can spend lifetimes just trying to figure out all of what is revealed in very sort of swift, time-wise packets of data. So how much data we can attend to and how quickly we can process it as well, like the speed of the flow is obviously also going to affect how long periods of time, quote unquote, are perceived to be. So that it's the relativity side of it. So that being said, when I was listening to Stephen Wolfram talking, I understood from what he was saying that yes, the time ultimately does come down to data processing, but what really sort of stuck out to me was that he said, as physicists we don't really talk about equations anymore, we talk about programs. And that made absolute sense, obviously, because if reality is functioning as a very sophisticated simulation, equations don't operate in isolation. They're not segmented. They're constantly interacting with other aspects of the coding, right? So it stuck in my mind as a result of that. So source, God's source creator being the source of ultimate power, ultimate truth, dependent upon what density and dimension of reality we are experiencing, also dependent upon which of the planes of our existence we're sort of attending to, will depend on how open and receptive as a vessel, as a vehicle, as a conduit for that power source, for that truth, that coding, in terms of how much light we can receive and process. It will be dependent upon that, because there's a point at which the more light we absorb, of course, as I described earlier, we can feel a whole lot of love and support, and it can absolutely change our perception of reality, having experiences where we may receive, a huge amount of God Source Creator's light in one go. However, it can, one, change our perception of reality to the point where so much of what is distorted and inverted can become increasingly painful to see, and obviously there can be frustration and a sense of disempowerment if we're not entirely sure how to respond and react to that. So we see that a lot in the awakening process. As people are becoming more awake and aware, they can feel quite disillusioned, and from that have a sense of disempowerment, and so, in a sec we'll get to the acronyms here to talk about, how does any of this relate to what's affecting us right now on this planet. Obviously, if you absorb so much light, the physical vessel, as the design of what we're currently experiencing on a collective level, would struggle to maintain its form in the frequency range that we're in. So that's one of the reasons why there is a need for a gradual increase in how much God Source Creator light is being, one, transmitted to the planet, which is one of the changes that's happening. There is a whole lot more light that we are receiving, but we are receiving it in a, we each and all have to choose for ourselves the ways and the means through which we will be open and receptive to it, so that we do have agency when it comes to how quickly we absorb it, and how often we want to do that, and how long we want to sustain those states. Because, as I've just said, within the awakening process, it can really come as a challenging experience if we're ready for change much faster than those around us and the world itself is willing to, let's say, participate in, or willing to agree to, then that can cause a lot of upset and frustration for us. So there has to be agency within it. So, all of this being said, let's summarise. I know I've waffled a little bit, but God Source Creator wanted a system through which different aspects of self could go into that system in a multitude of different worlds and realms to experience things that take different forms, that have different potentials, all of which can grow, can evolve. Obviously, there needs to be a mechanism through which anything that God Source Creator has experienced, to the point where there's no longer enjoyment in that, there's no longer a resonance, and I am identification. I don't want this anymore. Once it gets to that point, then there does have to be a mechanism through which power can be taken from, through which ends of cycles, life cycles, there has to be a means through which what is can be transmuted, changed. Energy is neither created nor destroyed, it changes state and form. So that being the case, when we get into the holographic sort of model of how the various planes of existences and the components of the soul, the levels and layers of coding that make up the different levels and layers of experience that we each and all have and have access to, non-physically speaking, we can tap into and observe and learn from the different aspects of ourselves as we become more aware of it. So as those transmissions are having the experiences, there has to be a means through which, if we don't identify with it, if we are, imagine you're in complete alignment with God Source Creator, and so you as the character avatar and God Source Creator agree on everything. If the soul transmission is telling you this is not what I want to experience, that wouldn't fall under the I am, of course, because it's a rejection of it, is that I am not. So at the moment there are systems that are wanting to maintain their, let's say, existence within the organic system, where the organic system is ready to move on to, experience, for this particular world at the very least, what is often described as the ascension process, basically to move into a new frequency range of possibilities and potentials where we experience reality with greater freedom and adventurism and exploration and creativity and fairness and justice and all of that. So at the minute, obviously, we're experiencing a version of reality where there's right now systems and representatives of those systems who would like, for as long as possible, to maintain the lower frequency range on the planet, but God Source Creator has other plans, as we know. So he would like to restore a version of this reality to a more organic, natural expression, and we're each and all here as representatives of God Source Creator's will to bring that into being. So what does that have to do with the original design? If you're God Source Creator and you create a system that you want to experience all this stuff, you would of course want to ensure that, well, that aspect of yourself is in that world. Anything and everything that is required, anything and everything that is necessary, is either readily available and or can be activated, can be brought into being for the duration of the lifetime of that incarnation of that particular aspect of self, that particular soul. So, that being the case, God Source Creator's covenant with self is any aspect of me that goes into any reality I've created has the right to access any and all resources in assistance with that lifetime, whatever it is that they need in order to have the experience from the soul's coding point of view, from the source coding point of view, whatever it is I've intended for that particular lifetime. The being that shows up in that reality has every right to access anything and everything that is necessary to support that. So the goodness system being God's original organic design, navigation as in, instruction, ideas, inspiration, empowerment, support system. The whole point of that is you, as a reflection, as a representation of me, are experiencing that reality, all that I am guiding you towards, all that I am inspiring you to be. And therefore, whatever it is you need while you're in that reality, you have every right to access, because ultimately we are one. Now, we often think of the function of reality in terms of the Trinity. Again, religious reference, but the Father, God source creator, the Son, in that religious context, obviously they're talking about Jesus. I believe Jesus to have been a representation of who and what we are each and all designed to be, to become, based on right now. We're in a reality where there are many measures, many preventative measures attempting to stop that from happening. I'm not suggesting that each and every one of us lives our life as Jesus did. Obviously not. I think Jesus was, for me, the example, the representation of what we can be if allowed to access, allowed to self-actualize, allowed to become what we've been designed to be. So the Holy Spirit in that sense would be the support system, it would be the goodness system, it would be what's giving guidance and instruction and is empowering us and supporting us to do that. So if we were going to fill these in then, so let's start with the organic. So the organic would be the original resources. Not sure if I'm doing this a bit too small, but I'll read it out anyway. So the original resources God assigned for the natural integration of constructs and characters. So there's aspects of Source showing up as the beings that are within the worlds and the realms. There's many other aspects of Source that are providing the environments, the worlds, the realms, for that to happen. And of course, you know, there's many different levels and layers to all of that. So God Source Creator's original covenant was any aspect of me that goes into any world, whatever I am instructing them to be, to become, they have the right, it is assigned to them, they have the right to have access to any and every natural resource that is needed to support that, to allow that, to ensure that that can happen. So the natural then would be the innovations assigned in trust for the utilisation of resources or representations of God Source Creator in assistance of life. So in other words, any and all natural organic resources that exist, that are here, that are in this reality, it's not, you can have anything and everything you want just because for the sake of it, just consume, because the natural flow is what is given, is expressed and experienced. From that, there is the requirement to participate in the production and the presentation, the presence of the I am, and any and all soul transmissions, organically speaking, will always carry forth what is not just good for the self, but also good for God Source Creator. It's a reflection of, and good for others, good for the construct, good for the system. So there's always going to be, if you are acting as a representative of God Source Creator, which is what we're organically originally designed to do, So this is the whole left-hand path, right-hand path thing. To my knowledge, to the best of my awareness, the left-hand path is ultimately service to self. It's just about satisfying the needs of the character you're showing up as. You know, that seeing yourself as distinct and separate from everything and anything else. The right-hand path, as far as I know, as far as I'm aware, is obviously the opposite of that. It's what I've just described. It's what's good for me is also good for Source, is also good for the other aspects of Source, the other representations of Source. Anything and everything that exists organically and naturally speaking is not just there for me, it's not just there for my pleasure, it's not just there for my consumption, but anything that I need in the assistance of my life where I can contribute, I can show up, step into my power, express, give power to what is here, to create things, to build things, to invent things, to take care of things, to share information, to grow things, whatever it may be. Anything and everything that our organic soul transmission is guiding us to do, what we need in order to do that, has been granted, has been agreed by God Source Creator before we ever even got here. So there's a covenant, organically speaking, and then the novations. If for anybody who's not aware, a novation is a contract that exchanges. So each and every incarnation that we have, that original covenant is transferred to the next and to the next and to the next. So that never goes away. We've always got that agreement. We've always got assigned to us whatever we need, and speaking at it from the experiential point of view, being here as a character, whatever it is we need, the answer from God Source Creator's perspective is yes. And here's the thing, even in the systems as they operate in the distorted, inverted fashion right now on this planet, they know that, and they know that we have to agree that we are not representations of God Source Creator in order to forfeit, in order to lose those rights. So you look at any control system on this planet, and what they have at their root is an office or a title, something that says human beings, mankind, men and women, they do not have any sovereign rights. Only a human being, a man or woman, who takes on a certain title or who sits in a certain office can be seen as sovereign, meaning can be seen as God Source Creator presenting Himself in this physical material reality. So they have to have us agree that that's not what we are, in order for our rights to access the resources that we need to be revoked. So obviously these systems have been evolving, and they've developed over time. When you go all the way back, and I say this as, I'm not pretending I know everything about all of this, but I do get this point, and I do get why it is so important. The original control systems, long before we had what we know now as modern finance and big governments and the overreach of the legal lawful systems that we have right now, long before any of that, the first control system was the agreement that only people who took on a certain title, were ordained, were the ones who could claim to be representatives of God. And then you would have your sovereigns, your kings and queens that were God appointed, which gave them the right to not just rule over, but take ownership of all of the resources associated with whatever the landmass, the nation, the country, the empire, the dynasty, whatever. In order for them to be granted the right to do that, they had to be seen as God, source, creator, appointed, meaning they were the only ones who could call themselves representations of God on the planet, which is what gave them these rights. Now, I do understand, and it's obviously there's only so much content I can share in any one session. I do understand that there's a whole inversion that's happened in terms of when those oaths are taken and these titles given, who or what they're actually swearing fealty to and to represent. I understand there's two parallel, two different stories as a result of the organic system and the inorganic system, like what has developed from the choice that people have made to deny and refuse the truth of who and what they are, which when you really get into it is ultimately what the root of all evil is. It's people in a state of denial and refusing to show up to experience reality as an expression of God, source, creator. And we'll break that down, I'll qualify that more as we get into later sessions. But what's really important here is the continuation of those systems relies upon the continued ignorance of the vast majority of people on the planet as to their actual genuine status. That's what sovereignty is. Sovereignty is there is no authority above me other than God. So if God, source, creator, owned created X, Y and Z, he being then the owner, because he or she, they who create own, that being the case, any natural resources, any organic aspects of this reality, God, source, creator ultimately decides who can have access. And if that is us, then we decide who can have access. Now, of course, we're in a very messy place right now because there's a lot of interference and a lot of infiltration and a lot of influence in terms of who is utilising what resources and for what reason, and is given access to the tools and the control of the systems to ensure that the vast majority of people still have to go through a custodial or a, when we talk about in trust, if God, source, creator is the settler or the grantor, the soul transmission, as in from non-physical through to physical, what we are physical representations of is the trustee. That's where the agreement lies. And then the beneficiary, so the trustee is the administrator rather of whatever's being put in trust, and the beneficiary is those that receive, right? So the soul, and I'll link some resources so you can see this. So the soul is the trustee, and we as the character, the physical representation of that, act as the beneficiaries on the other side. So there are a lot of people out there who are already very clued up with a lot of this. There are people who are already challenging how money is created, for instance, because anything, the words assigned is really important. Anything that we have to sign for, we are assigning from the soul's point of view, we're acting on behalf of Source to agree to it. That's why it's a sign of nature. It's also the reason why the soul is often represented as an X, because when you've got this infinity flow happening, we're here. That's us. And every other representation of Source. But those of us with agency, and we'll talk about this when we get into the densities, those of us with agency, we sit there. So you've got, on the one hand, your input, and of course it's not just a linear, or rather, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not just one directional, it's toroidal. This is why anything that is living, organically speaking, has the energy toroidal sort of flow around it, and that's true on all levels. So when the sessions that I linked from last year, when I talked about what I saw in the outer body experience, I saw this, but at the meta, big sort of highest sort of level of perception. I've since been doing a whole lot of research into stuff, and this, that is true all the way down to the very teeny tiny quantum level. But we'll talk about that as we get into it in more detail. So if that's us, we're essentially acting as, or supposed to be acting as, trustee on the soul transmission side of it, and then what we show up as would be the beneficiary side of it. And that's where, of course, who claims to have the right to be trustees and who has the right to decide who gets what resources. It's all through implied consent, because we have to agree that we're not this. Everything I've just been talking about, we're not God, Source, Creator. We're not showing up as representations of that. We don't have any right, therefore, to access any organic natural resources, and or, because this is where it ties in with the financial side of it, and or any representative sort of tokens. So the financial system, again, I'll link some resources so you can look at this, but Richard Werner proved beyond doubt that 97% of the money supply, money that is created each year, is happening through essentially we the people requesting it, asking for it, giving our assignations, forfeiting our natural rights, giving our assignations for that currency to be created. And then when it's given to us, if we, it's, whether it's loans or credit cards or we're setting up a business or whatever it might be, when that's done, once we've given our soul's approval as the representative for Source to agree to it being created, it's then obviously converted into a security instrument, a debt instrument. The bank or whatever company purchases it from us, which is the money that they give us, and then obviously we're told we have to pay it back because this conversion's happened. We have signed to agree to it, but what we've not signed to agree to is that as God, Source, Creator, it is in fact ours. That's not what the contract or the agreement states. But those contracts and agreements do not meet the spec, if you like, the necessary, required indicators or aspects of a legal, lawful contract. You've got to have, you know, the meeting of the minds. You can't have the meeting of the minds if you don't have the full information. And so because there's not full disclosure in them, this is what a lot of people are now challenging and saying, hey, you know, you are creating from our requests, but what we essentially then are approving, agreeing to, signing our sign of nature to X marks the spot, is not being then given to us. We're being told that you are the custodians of it, or, you know, whatever label you give it, so they're acting as the trustees for it. And so this, who or what is God's source creator, and what is the relationship in terms of the system, obviously there's a lot more information to look at, and there's a lot of different ways what I've just talked about is applied in terms of how the systems function on this planet. One of the things I definitely want to promote is for people to start to look at materials that explain this more from the perception of not just the theory or the abstract principles of it, but how can it actually be applied in the real world. You know, what we're experiencing is the result of, yes, our own ignorance, but because we've been lied to and because we haven't understood how the very basis of those systems really boils down to us not knowing that one simple yet significant truth. So I hope I've not rambled on too long. I hope that makes sense. There's obviously a lot more information I want to share. There's obviously a lot more that I can signpost you to in support of what I've just talked about. But for now, I think we've covered enough ground. I'm getting really warm. Thank you to anybody that comes to listen to this. I obviously hope to continue to have you, whoever you are, as a viewer, a listener. I will put some materials to support what I've said today in a playlist. I'll date it and I'll be uploading this soon. So yeah, thanks. Speak to you soon. Bye.